bottom line.
Hello and welcome to the Payments Podcast. I'm Owen McDonald and I'll be your host for a chat that is awkward and uncomfortable. It deals with a criminal form of betrayal, insider fraud at banks and corporations. It's hard to detect and on the rise. As Quadrant said in its Spark Matrix Insider Risk Manage report for Q3 2024, and I quote, "Detection of insider threats remains a challenge for organizational security teams. Bad actors have legitimate access to sensitive data. This problem is further compounded by insiders with elevated data access privileges. Such insiders have the potential to inflict severe damage before such breaches are detected and mitigated," unquote. Because of this, since 2019, September has been designated as National Insider Threat Awareness Month, or NETAM for short. It's an annual campaign initiated by a group of U.S. defense and counterintelligence agencies. As part of Bottom Line's NETAM coverage, we're fortunate to be joined by Nick Griffin, Product Director of Risk Solutions at Bottom Line. He's a smart man with valuable insights, and we've got him live in the studio. Nick Griffin, welcome to the Payments Podcast.
Thanks for having me today, Owen.
Thanks for being here. Let's talk about insider fraud. I'm going to open with a question that many of us wonder about, but I don't hear a lot of people asking about, Nick, and it's this. With all the advances in threat detection capabilities implemented since 2020, why do insider threats continue to be such a difficult challenge? And I realize there are 25 ways to answer that question. I'm looking for the few central reasons that insider fraud is so hard to defeat.
Yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right. There's a ton of answers to that question, and it's clearly a challenge that continues to capture attention. Another report I was reading recently said that over the last year, 76% of organizations reported an insider threat incident, which was up from 66% when back in 2019 when National Insider Threat Awareness Month started. So to kind of answer the question of what's driving that increase, I think it's a few factors, but the two that really come to mind for me are at the macro level. First is, a few years back, we had a big global incident that shifted everybody to remote work. That has caused a opportunity with a lot more devices that access sensitive data. We're still, whether it's remote or hybrid, we have all of these new access points and a lot more people who are working in environments that don't have quite that same over-the-shoulder feel. So there's some opportunity there. There is some relaxation there. And then the second piece is that people continue to feel financial pressure from economic conditions. Certainly inflation is a big topic still in the news these days. And, that's the type of pocketbook thing that puts pressure on people. And if you just look at those two things, you've got two sides of the classic fraud triangle. So you've got opportunity, you've got pressure. Now you're only a rationalization away from somebody trying to do something they shouldn't.
That's a great answer, Nick. There are a lot of potential consequences to an undetected insider attack. You've got financial consequences, reputational, operational. How is this fact forcing organizations to evolve their thinking about insider threat mitigation?
Yeah, it's been an interesting shift over the last few years. For a long time, insider threats have been a bit of a lesser priority in comparison to external threats, especially from a budget perspective. And that makes sense, right? Like the big financial transaction that was sent to the wrong place, that gets headlines. The state-sponsored or Lazarus group hacking into your defenses, that gets headlines. Insider threat makes it into the news, but maybe it's not front page news. But what's been really interesting recently is we've had a number of conversations with organizations throughout the globe. So it's not even one specific geography, but they're starting to create these teams that are specifically focused on insider threats. It's still nascent. A lot of them are still kind of being developed and remits are getting refined. But what that tells us is that there is starting to be a increased focus and specific budget put aside that's outside of maybe your traditional fraud and risk teams. So I think that's the shift that we're starting to see, and we'll see if it continues. Like I said, it's still nascent, but I think it's an encouraging sign when it comes to combating insider threats.
I would have to agree. I think most of us would. When we spoke previously, Nick, you told me about your deep distrust of mainframe computers, which still house about 70% of account and payment data across all US banks. I'm just blown away by that figure. What makes mainframes such a unique vulnerability? How can banks and FIs secure them?
Yeah, it really is a shocking stat, isn't it? We've had so much technological advancement, and yet we are still so heavily reliant on these systems from the '60s for core operations. And I get it, right? They were built to be very efficient, and they still do their job very, very efficiently. And beyond that, because of how they're used, to rip out and replace them, it's not an easy task. It's an expensive task. It's a long, long project. So really, the shift becomes, how do you protect it? The first, I think, is at the people level, making sure that you have the right user access controls, making sure that the people who do have access to these systems, especially where sensitive data is involved, have the right training, and all of the tools that they need to do to kind of protect your organization at that level. But people are imperfect, so you also need to have some monitoring systems in place. So you asked about unique vulnerabilities with mainframes, right? One thing that's particularly difficult with mainframes is that when they were built, the logs that we often rely on for some of our monitoring were built for a different purpose. They were built to identify a problem with the system processing, not to monitor a user who was looking at sensitive data or to monitor it for security particular incidents. So, you can't really rely on those logs in the same way as you could. So now you need to think about, how do you more comprehensively monitor that mainframe? And what can you do to kind of fill that gap where it exists? And that's something I think organizations ought to consider whenever they're looking at their technology strategy for monitoring insiders.
Wow, it's such a and there's a lot of help out there, but I mean, I think payment partners are helping banks and financial institutions with this. But I think it's a huge problem. You've put your finger on there. And dovetailing off that last question, what are the elements of an effective insider threat management or ITM solution, Nick? The Spark Matrix Insider Risk Management Report I mentioned before identifies 7 key capabilities for an ITM solution. What can you tell me about those?
Yeah, I always appreciate reports like Spark Matrix because they do a good job of raising aspects that an organization wants to consider, whether they're, putting out an RFP or RFI for new technology, or even just evaluating what they have currently in place, right? I think what's really interesting in the 7 capabilities that Quadrant lists here is that a lot of them have multiple ways to implement those solutions and those aspects of a solution. And it's ultimately up to each organization to think about how they want to prioritize those approaches and what best complements the other layers of protection they might already have in place. So, for example, the report talks about user and device monitoring. Well, that can happen in a lot of different ways. It could be an agent on the endpoint. It could be monitoring at the network level or monitoring at the application level. There's different ways that can be applied. Each approach has its merits and is a part of good threat mitigation. So it's just a matter of looking at that and thinking about what best fits in accomplishing your goals, given everything else you have in place and how those layers play together.
And for that reason, it's a good report to look at. This is a amazing conversation, Nick. I feel like we could go for a lot longer, but this is my last question. A couple of key takeaways for our listeners to think about as we wrap, Nick.
Yeah, so I mean, I think the term I probably use a bit too much is layered approach, but in today's environment, it really is so important. You're trying to protect an IT environment that now consists of everything from mainframe technologies to modern SaaS applications that might not even sit on your own infrastructure. And all of them have these access points and ability to potentially get to sensitive data or financial transactions, anything like that. And then on top of that, like we talked about, we're dealing with global teams that work in offices, at home, on the go, and they have these different access points to that sensitive data. So by making sure you have a layered technology and training approach, definitely don't want to forget that people aspect to protect your environment is so important. And once you have that, you need to make sure that the layers are talking to each other. So, didn't really talk about this yet, but there's definitely aspects of any area that you're monitoring, whether it's insider threat or maybe payment fraud specific or network security, that you're going to keep within an internal team, right? You have an internal audit team. They're doing something very sensitive, which is watching your organization. If you let that spread out too big and too wide, it kind of defeats the purpose. So you've got to make sure that you find the balance of that, but also making sure that your layers are talking to each other, because if not, you could have something suspicious going on in a internal core application that eventually leads into an incident at your ERP or your payment portal sending out a fraudulent transaction. So making sure that there's something to kind of like correlate those two, either at the technology level, at the process level, whatever makes sense for you, I think is really important. So kind of those layers, and then making sure that there aren't complete silos around each layer.
Layers, Nick, layers and silos. Let's keep that in mind. Okay. Well, folks, it's National Insider Threat Awareness Month, abbreviated as NITAM. At this very moment, I'm sad to say that an employee somewhere is defrauding their employer or worse. Financial firms, fight back. Pay attention and get the right technology partners. I want to thank our excellent guest, Nick Griffin. And to our great audience, thanks for taking the time to listen to this episode. Catch us next time on your favorite podcast platforms such as Apple, SoundCloud, and Spotify. Bye for now.
The Payments Podcast from Bottom Line.